"You're mine for 90 days, the millionaire declared. But one kiss changed forever. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support truly means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The rain fell steady against the glass roof of the Belmont Hotel terrace, turning the city lights into blurred streaks of gold and silver. Across the marble table sat Adrian Wolf, 35, founder of Wolf Capital, a man whose name moved markets and whose stare could silence an entire boardroom. Tonight, however, his voice was calm, almost clinical, as he slid a leather folder across the table. 90 days, he said, his tone low but firm. You will attend 5 public events with me. Follow the terms exactly, and after that, we part ways. Inside the folder, the word contract was embossed in gold. Mira Tran's fingers trembled as she opened it. She was 26, a barista and part-time design student, exhausted and cornered by life. Her mother was in the hospital, the rent on their tiny apartment long overdue, and the world had run out of mercy. The man sitting across from her was everything she was not: composed, powerful, untouchable. "And if I sign?" she asked quietly, her voice barely carrying over the rain. Adrian leaned back, eyes unreadable. "Then your mother gets her surgery tonight. The transfer will happen within the hour." Mira swallowed hard. Her reflection in the rain-specked window showed a girl who had run out of options. The coffee shop uniform she had worn to the meeting clung to her damp shoulders. She felt small in front of him, like a misplaced piece in a world built for people who never worried about rent or hospital bills. "What happens if I break the rules?" she asked. Adrian's lips curved slightly, not quite a smile. "You will not. There is a penalty clause, but I do not think you are the kind of person who fails to keep a promise." His voice was steady, but there was a flicker of something else, a curiosity maybe. Outside, thunder rolled softly over the skyline. Mira's phone buzzed on the table. A message from the hospital. Asterisk deposit required by midnight. Asterisk her chest tightened. She looked back at Adrian, the man who could solve everything and yet felt like a storm waiting to swallow her whole. 5 events, she repeated, steadying her voice. "And after 90 days, we are done." "Completely," he said, sliding a pen toward her. The pen was heavy, silver, engraved with his initials, W. She hesitated only a moment before pressing it to paper. The sound of her signature seemed to echo louder than the rain. When she looked up, Adrian was already standing. He extended his hand, polite, professional. "Welcome to the agreement, Miss Tran." Mira rose, meeting his gaze. "It is Mira," she said softly. "Just Mira." For the first time that night, something like a shadow of warmth flickered in his expression. "Then, just Adrian," he replied. As they shook hands, lightning illuminated the city outside, 2 strangers bound by ink and necessity, unaware that this contract would not just change their status but rewrite the meaning of love itself. When the ink dried on that contract, Mira Tran stepped into a life that did not feel like her own. The next morning, she stood at the edge of Wolf Capital's marble lobby, her reflection multiplied in walls of glass and steel. She had traded her coffee-stained apron for a tailored navy dress that had arrived overnight, courtesy of Adrian Wolf's assistant. Everything about the building felt intimidating: the muted scent of leather, the hum of expensive silence, the cold precision of people who moved like they belonged. She did not. A woman in a gray suit approached, her heels tapping sharply. "Miss Tran, Mr. Wolf is waiting upstairs." Mira nodded, clutching the strap of her purse, her palms damp. The elevator ride to the top floor felt endless. When the doors opened, Adrian was there impeccably dressed, already mid-call, his gaze flicking toward her once before finishing his sentence in that steady, measured tone. He gestured toward the seat opposite his desk. "Sit." She obeyed, unsure if she should speak. He finished his call, removed his cufflinks, and finally looked at her. "We have 3 days before the first event," he said. "You will attend with me as my fiancée. Claire, my assistant, will handle your wardrobe and training." Mira blinked. "Training?" Adrian's mouth curved faintly. "You are entering my world, Miss Tran. There are rules. How you speak, how you walk, what you wear, it all matters." His tone was not cruel, just factual, like he was describing a business plan. "I am not trying to change who you are. I am ensuring that the world does not devour you." His words landed heavier than she expected. She nodded, though her chest tightened. Claire appeared again, efficient as clockwork, handing Mira a tablet with a schedule. Fittings at 10, etiquette at 1, makeup trial at 4. Mira managed a quiet thank you. Adrian watched her, fingers steepled under his chin. "And Mira," he said, voice softer, "the contract states boundaries for both of us. You are under no obligation beyond appearances. I do not mix business with emotion." Mira met his eyes. "Good," she said, though something in her voice trembled. "Neither do I." That night, back in her apartment, she found the hospital message she had dreaded all week paid in full. Her mother's treatment had begun. Relief washed over her, so fierce she had to sit down. For the first time in months, her mother's life was safe. And yet, as she glanced at the silver pen on her table engraved with the initials AW, she felt a strange unease. It was too quiet, too perfect. Over the next few days, Mira moved through a world she barely recognized. Claire introduced her to a stylist who pinned and hemmed silk like art. They taught her how to stand tall, how to smile with just enough warmth, how to survive under 100 camera flashes. She stumbled often mixing up utensils during lunch training, laughing too loud, calling a board member sir when it was his wife who held the title. But Adrian, who attended one of the sessions unannounced, did not scold her. Instead, he watched quietly from the doorway, a hint of amusement in his eyes when she muttered an apology after spilling water on her dress. "You will learn," he said afterward. "You are already better than half the people pretending to belong." His compliment caught her off guard. No one had ever said something like that to her. On the eve of their first public appearance, the penthouse hummed with tension. Adrian stood by the window, the city glittering behind him, while Mira adjusted her borrowed gown. "Remember," he said, his tone calm, "smile, nod, let me lead the conversation." She met his gaze in the reflection of the glass. "And what if I forget?" "Then," he said with the faintest trace of a real smile, "you improvise." For a fleeting second, the storm between them quieted. Two strangers, bound by necessity, stood at the edge of something neither could name. As thunder rolled beyond the skyline, Mira thought of the ticking clock counting down 90 days, and wondered how long she could survive living in a lie that already felt too real. The night of the first gala arrived with a restless kind of silence. The Wolf Foundation Charity Ball was the kind of event Mira Tran had only seen in magazines, a world of chandeliers, champagne, and soft laughter from people who had never worried about a hospital bill. The limousine stopped at the grand steps of the Belmont Hotel, and when Adrian Wolf stepped out, flashes from cameras lit the night like lightning. He extended a hand to her, and for a moment she froze. His voice was steady. "Breathe. You belong here tonight." Mira took his hand, her heart pounding as she stepped onto the red carpet. Reporters called their names, cameras clicked, and she smiled the way Claire had taught her, graceful but distant. The gown shimmered under the lights, silver silk that made her look like she had never spilled coffee for a living. Adrian's palm was firm on the small of her back as they walked inside. Every eye turned toward them, whispers rising like wind. At the far end of the ballroom, a string quartet played beneath a chandelier large enough to crush them both. Adrian led her to a table near the front, where investors, donors, and dignitaries gathered. Conversation flowed in polished tones, talk of mergers, art collections, and overseas properties. Mira stayed quiet, sipping water, careful not to reveal how out of place she felt. But then a voice cut through the hum, smooth and mocking. "So this is the fiancé everyone is talking about." A woman in an emerald dress, tall, confident, the kind of beauty carved by privilege, smiled without warmth. "Adrian, you did not mention she was new to the scene." Mira's cheeks flushed. Adrian's expression did not change. "Sloane," he said evenly, "this is Mira Tran, and yes, she is new. That is the point." Sloane laughed softly. "How refreshing." The conversation shifted, but the sting lingered. Mira lowered her gaze, tracing the rim of her glass. When Adrian leaned closer, his voice was almost a whisper. "Ignore her. She feeds on reactions." She nodded, but her stomach nodded. As the evening went on, Adrian was pulled into conversation after conversation. Mira sat quietly until a presenter announced the foundation's annual pledge auction. One of the donors, a gray-haired man with a sharp tongue, turned toward her. "Miss Tran, since you are new to philanthropy, perhaps you would like to tell us what causes touch your heart." Laughter rippled through the table, polite but cruel. Mira's pulse raced. She glanced at Adrian, but he was across the table, speaking to a sponsor. She could have stayed silent, but something in her rebelled. She straightened. Education, she said clearly, for people who cannot afford it. My mother used to say opportunity should not depend on a bank account. The table fell quiet. If we want to make change, maybe we could invest in skill training places that teach people to build, to design, to create. Not just give charity, but give tools. For a moment, no one spoke. Then someone clapped. Then another. The applause spread, genuine and unexpected. Adrian turned, his eyes meeting hers across the table, something new and unreadable in his gaze. Later, as they left the ballroom, he stopped her near the grand staircase. You handled that well, he said, his tone softer than before. You turned condescension into purpose. Mira shrugged, still nervous. I just said what I felt. That, he said, is what people remember. As they stepped out into the cool night, the rain had stopped. The city smelled of wet pavement and fresh possibility. For the first time since signing that contract, Mira did not feel like a guest in someone else's life. She felt like herself, strong, unpolished, and real. But as the limousine door closed, she caught sight of Sloane, watching them from the hotel steps, her smile sharp as glass. In that moment, Mira did not know that Sloane had already decided to destroy her, one secret at a time. The countdown had begun, not just to the end of their 90 days, but to the moment the truth would test everything they had built. The following weeks passed like a blur of lights, fittings, and events that Mira Tran could barely process. Each morning she woke up to an itinerary sent by Claire, and each evening she returned home too exhausted to even take off her jewelry before falling asleep. Adrian Wolfe, as promised, remained distant but reliable. He was always on time, always composed, always aware of every camera and every whisper in the room. To the world, they looked like the perfect couple, but behind closed doors, their words were few. One late evening, after a long investor dinner, Mira found herself alone in the penthouse living room. Rain tapped against the tall windows again, a rhythm she had come to know too well. Adrian entered quietly, loosening his tie. You did well tonight, he said. Better than I expected. Mira looked up from the couch, half smiling. You make it sound like a surprise, he shrugged. I underestimated you. That will not happen again. His words should have sounded cold, but something in his voice had softened. He poured himself a glass of water and sat across from her. Do you regret signing the contract? The question caught her off guard. I do not know, she admitted. It saved my mother's life. I guess that is all that matters. Adrian studied her for a long moment. You are the only person I have met who measures worth in lives instead of numbers. She laughed quietly. That is because I do not have numbers to count. He leaned back, eyes tracing the skyline. When I was 25, I lost everything. My father's company collapsed. Reporters camped outside our house for weeks. My mother would not leave her room. I promised myself I would never let anyone have that power over me again. His tone carried no self-pity, just memory. That is why you hide behind contracts, Mira said softly, because paper cannot betray you. He looked at her, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. Maybe. A quiet moment stretched between them, filled only by the hum of the city below. Then she stood. Good night, Adrian. He watched her leave, something unspoken hovering in the space she left behind. The next morning, a new schedule appeared. A weekend retreat at the Wolfe estate outside the city. It was part of the image campaign, Adrian hosting a charity workshop for young entrepreneurs. Mira's stomach twisted at the thought of seeing those headlines again. But when she arrived, the air was different. The countryside estate was less intimidating than the city open skies, the scent of pine, the sound of laughter from the staff preparing the event. During lunch, Adrian guided her through the garden paths, lined with blooming white roses. You seem quieter today, he said. Too many lessons on how to smile, she replied. It gets heavy after a while. He stopped walking, watching her carefully. You can stop pretending when it is just us. She blinked, unsure what to say. You mean that? For tonight, he said, no cameras, no rules. The words felt dangerous, but freeing. They talked for hours about her sketches, about his mother's favorite books, about how loneliness felt louder in a crowd. When evening came, they stood on the terrace as the sun sank behind the hills. The air grew cooler, and Mira shivered. Without thinking, Adrian removed his jacket and draped it over her shoulders. You will catch a cold, he murmured. She looked up at him, eyes wide. You broke one of your own rules. His lips curved faintly. Then I suppose you should report me. For the first time, she laughed freely, and he did not look away. Something in the distance cracked thunder, or maybe the quiet breaking of a wall neither had noticed before. Later that night, back in her guest room, Mira stared at the countdown on her phone. 64 days left. She thought of Adrian's voice, low and tired, confessing pieces of a past that still haunted him. She wondered what would happen when the clock hit 0. Would she walk away with her freedom? Or would the contract take something she could never reclaim her heart? 2 weeks after the retreat, the rhythm of their arrangement shifted in ways neither Adrian Wolf nor Mira Tran could name. The walls between them had thinned, not with grand gestures but with quiet moments, coffee shared before dawn meetings, the way he now waited for her at the elevator, or how her laughter sometimes broke through the steel edges of his routine. Still, the countdown ticked silently forward. 50 days left. Their next appearance came sooner than expected, a high-profile press conference for Wolf Capital's new community partnership. Mira was seated beside Adrian at the long table facing a sea of reporters. Flashbulbs exploded, voices overlapping, and questions came sharp as arrows. Adrian handled them all with calm precision until one reporter turned to Mira. "Miss Tran, many are curious about your background. You are not from a business family, are you? How does it feel to be engaged to one of the city's wealthiest men?" Mira's throat tightened, but she met the question head-on. "I am proud of where I come from," she said evenly. "I worked as a barista while studying design. That is who I am, and I am not ashamed of it." A murmur rippled through the room, some impressed, some disbelieving. Adrian's expression was unreadable, but later, as the crowd dispersed, he leaned close enough for only her to hear. "You were brave," he said, "and honest. You did not tell me honesty was part of the contract," she teased softly. He almost smiled. "It is not. That is what makes it rare." That night, they attended the board dinner celebrating the press event. It was there that Mira saw Sloane again, the same woman from the gala. Sloane approached with a glass of champagne and a smile sharp enough to cut. "Mira, darling, you are getting good at this performance," she said sweetly. Almost believable. Mira kept her voice steady. "I am not performing." "Of course you are," Sloane said, her tone dripping with mock sympathy. "Everyone knows you are just a temporary distraction. Adrian's charity project." Mira felt her stomach twist, but she refused to look away. "If that were true," she said, "you would not sound so nervous saying it." Sloane's smile faltered for a second before she turned to Adrian, who had just joined them. "You should be careful," she said smoothly. "When you mix business with pity, the press can be unforgiving." Adrian's eyes cooled. "Thank you for the advice," he replied, "but pity has never been part of my business." The conversation ended there, but the air stayed tense. Later, in the car ride home, silence filled the space between them. Mira stared out the window, city lights streaking past. "She hates me," she murmured. "She hates losing," Adrian corrected. "Do not take it personally." She turned to him, her voice soft. "And what about you, Adrian? Do you hate losing?" His jaw tightened slightly. "I prefer not to." Their eyes met in the reflection of the glass, the question hanging between them like smoke. Days later, at another event, Mira proved again that she was more than a prop. When a last-minute crisis threatened the evening, one of the speakers fell ill. Leaving a gap in the program, Mira volunteered to speak about the foundation's outreach. Adrian hesitated, then nodded. 5 minutes, he said quietly. No notes. She stepped onto the stage, hands trembling at first, but when she spoke, her voice carried with unexpected strength. She talked about the people she used to serve coffee to the artists, the students, the dreamers trying to survive. She spoke about how opportunities could turn ordinary lives into extraordinary ones. By the time she finished, the applause was real and thunderous. Adrian stood at the edge of the stage, watching her not as a businessman watching an asset, but as a man seeing something he had not believed in for years' hope. When she joined him afterward, breathless and flushed, he said quietly, "You saved the evening." Mira laughed softly. "I thought that was your job." "Not tonight," he said. "Tonight it was yours." That night, as they stood in the elevator heading up to the penthouse, the silence between them was heavy with unspoken words. When the doors opened, neither moved. For one heartbeat too long, they stood close enough to feel the air change. Then Adrian stepped back. "Good night, Mira." She nodded, her pulse quickening. "Good night, Adrian." The doors slid shut, leaving both of them wondering when pretending had stopped feeling like pretending. 40 days remained on the contract, but time had begun to move differently. What was supposed to be a performance now felt dangerously real. Mira Tran could sense it in the way Adrian Wolf's gaze lingered longer than it should, in how his tone softened when he said her name. She tried to tell herself it was still business, yet her heart betrayed her every time he walked into a room. One Friday night, a storm swept through the city, forcing the staff to cancel a dinner event. The penthouse felt quieter than usual, the sound of rain against the glass like distant music. Mira was sketching at the kitchen island when Adrian appeared, sleeves rolled up, a rare hint of fatigue on his face. "You work even on nights off," he said. "Old habits," she replied. "I draw when I cannot sleep." He leaned closer to look at her sketch pad. "Is that the community center idea you mentioned?" She nodded. "I keep thinking of ways to make it more sustainable workshops, housing for apprentices, maybe an art wing. But ideas do not build walls." Adrian studied the drawing for a long time. "You would be surprised," he said quietly. "Some walls start on paper." Mira smiled faintly, unaware of how much he meant it. The lights flickered as thunder rumbled across the skyline. Without thinking, Adrian crossed to the kitchen counter and began making coffee. The smell filled the room, warm and grounding. "You make coffee now?" she teased. "You are full of surprises." He handed her a mug. "Do not tell anyone. It would ruin my reputation." She laughed, and for a moment, the world felt simple again. They sat by the window, the storm reflecting in their eyes. "You know," he said after a pause, "when I signed that contract, I thought control was safety. But lately I am not sure what safety even means." Mira looked at him, the glow from the city lights softening his sharp features. "Maybe safety is not control," she said. "Maybe it is trust." The silence that followed was not awkward. It was heavy with understanding. The rain eased, leaving the city drenched in silver light. When Adrian reached over to brush a stray hair from her cheek, she did not pull away. The touch was brief, careful, but it lingered like a promise neither dared to speak. The next morning, the illusion of calm shattered. Headlines filled every screen, a leaked article questioning their relationship, hinting that Mira's role was nothing more than a paid arrangement. The photos were cruelly timed: Mira entering a limousine, Adrian holding a contract folder. "They think I am your charity case," Mira said, her voice shaking as she threw the tablet onto the table. Adrian's jaw clenched. "This is Sloane," he said. "She has been looking for leverage." "And she found it," Mira whispered. "Maybe they are right. Maybe I am just—" "Stop." His voice was firm. "You are not a prop. You have earned every place you stand in." "Then prove it," she said, meeting his eyes. "Not with money, with truth." The challenge hung in the air between them. Adrian exhaled slowly. "I will handle this," he said, but she caught the hesitation behind his certainty. That night, when he left for an emergency meeting with the board, Mira sat alone, staring out over the city that now felt colder. She thought about every word they had shared, every moment that blurred the line between contract and connection. She realized how deeply she had stepped into something she was never meant to feel. Hours later, the door opened softly. Adrian returned, rain-soaked, his tie undone. "It is handled," he said quietly. "The board believes me for now." Mira turned toward him. "For now is not forever." He took a step closer. "Neither is this contract." The storm outside roared again as he reached out, his fingers brushing hers. The world seemed to still around them. "Adrian," she whispered, "if we keep crossing lines, there will be nothing left to pretend." His answer came in a voice barely above a breath. "Then maybe it is time we stop pretending." The countdown still ticked in her phone, but in that moment, numbers no longer mattered. Something else had begun, fragile, forbidden, and undeniably real. The following days moved like a storm without rain. The air between Mira Tran and Adrian Wolf had changed, charged with emotions neither of them dared to name. But the world outside had no mercy for fragile things. When Adrian walked into the boardroom that Monday morning, the tension was already waiting for him. The headlines from the leaked article had spread farther than he expected. Investors were questioning his judgment, and the board wanted answers. Sloane sat among them, poised and polished, a faint smile playing at her lips. "Public image is everything, Adrian," she said smoothly. "This arrangement with Miss Tran was supposed to be strategic, not scandalous." Adrian's jaw tightened. There was no scandal until someone created one. "The press does not see it that way," Sloane replied, "and neither do the shareholders." She slid a file across the table. "There will be a vote next week regarding leadership continuity. The firm needs stability." It was not a suggestion. It was a threat wrapped in civility. When Adrian left the meeting, the corridors felt narrower than usual. His world, the one built on precision, control, and image, was tilting. That evening, he found Mira in the penthouse garden. tending to the small potted plants she had rescued from her apartment weeks ago. "You should not be out here," he said softly. "It is cold." "I needed air," she answered. "Did they believe you?" He shook his head slightly. "They believe what benefits them most. Right now, that is not me." Mira's hands stilled over the soil. "Then maybe I should go," she whispered. "Maybe that is what will fix this." Adrian's eyes hardened. "You leaving would prove them right. I will not let them define you as a mistake." "Adrian, this is not about pride," she said. "This is about survival for both of us." He stepped closer, his voice low but steady. "You were never a transaction to me, Mira." The words hung in the air like a confession. But before she could respond, the glass door opened behind them. Claire appeared, breathless, holding a phone. "Sir, you need to see this." On the screen was a video, grainy but damning Mira entering the penthouse, the timestamp manipulated to suggest a secret affair that predated the contract. Sloane's name flashed in the leak tag. Mira's face went pale. "They will ruin you," she said. "No," Adrian replied, his tone sharpening. "They will not. I will not let them." He turned to Claire. "Call my lawyer. Prepare everything. If they want a war, they will have one." But later that night, after the calls and the threats, after the silence settled again, Adrian found himself standing outside Mira's room. The door was closed, light spilling faintly from beneath it. He could hear her moving inside, pacing, packing perhaps. He wanted to speak, to ask her to stay, but pride held him back. In the quiet, he realized something painful and true. Power could command everything except trust. The next morning, when he woke, the apartment was still except for a folded note on the kitchen counter. "Thank you for saving my mother," it read in careful handwriting. "But I cannot let your world destroy you because of me." His heart clenched as he read her name at the bottom. Outside, the city was waking up, but Adrian Wolf's world had already begun to fall apart. 3 days after Mira Tran left, Adrian Wolf's life became a series of hollow meetings and colder mornings. Every decision felt heavier, every word from his board like a blade, disguised as advice. Sloane's plan was working. The media fed on the scandal, twisting the story into something poisonous. The upcoming gala, once meant to celebrate Wolf Capital's charity expansion, had turned into a public trial of his reputation. But Adrian had made a decision. He was done hiding behind contracts and silence. When the night of the event arrived, the ballroom gleamed with gold and glass. Reporters crowded outside, their cameras hungry. Sloane stood near the stage, radiant in red, the perfect picture of false loyalty. "Try not to look too lonely tonight," she said sweetly as Adrian passed. "Investors fear a man without control." He ignored her, stepping into the light of the microphones. "Good evening," he began, his voice even but firm. "Before we discuss business, I want to address the truth." The crowd hushed. "A story has circulated suggesting that my relationship with Miss Mira Tran was fabricated for publicity. That is a lie. What began as an arrangement became something real, something I was too proud to admit." A ripple of shock moved through the room. Cameras flashed wildly. "I made a mistake," he continued. "Not by meeting her, but by thinking I could confine honesty and love to a contract. She reminded me that leadership is not control, it is responsibility. And love is not an image, it is truth." Gasps and whispers filled the hall. From the back of the room, a figure appeared. Mira stood near the entrance, pale but composed, her simple dress a sharp contrast to the glittering crowd. She had come only to return his pen, the silver one engraved with his initials, but hearing his words stopped her in place. Adrian saw her and froze for half a heartbeat before his expression softened. "And if anyone still doubts her integrity," he said, lifting a tablet from the podium, "perhaps you should see this." The screen behind him came alive with documents, emails, timestamps, and financial logs. Proof that Sloane had paid a private investigator to leak the footage. Gasps turned to outrage. Sloane's mask cracked, her calm slipping as security approached. "You cannot prove," she started, but Adrian's voice cut through. "I already did." Applause erupted, first hesitant, then thunderous. The crowd surged with approval as Sloane was escorted out. Adrian turned back to Mira. For a moment the chaos faded, leaving only the two of them. He stepped down from the stage and approached her slowly. "You came back," he said quietly. Mira looked up at him, her eyes shining. "I did not want to, but I could not let you stand alone." His hand reached for hers, fingers trembling slightly. "You never were just part of my image," he said. "You were the only thing real in it." The room watched as Adrian Wolf, the man who once believed everything could be solved with logic and ink, broke the last clause of his own contract. He pulled her close and kissed her, not for show, not for redemption, but for truth. The cameras flashed again, capturing not a scandal, but a beginning. Weeks passed after the night of the gala, and the storm that had once threatened to destroy Adrian Wolfe finally began to fade. The media moved on to new scandals, the board withdrew its motion against him, and Wolfe Capital slowly rebuilt its image not through power, but through integrity. The first project under the newly restructured Wolfe Foundation was exactly what Mira Tran had once sketched on a napkin: the Community Makers Lab, a place where creativity and opportunity could meet. On the morning of its grand opening, sunlight poured through the glass roof of the new center. Volunteers arranged tools, students pinned their first drawings, and the smell of fresh paint still lingered in the air. Mira stood at the entrance, adjusting a banner that read, "Built for the dreamers who never stop trying." Behind her, Adrian approached, no longer in his armor of suits and silence. He wore an open-collared shirt, sleeves rolled up, the air of a man who had learned the difference between control and care. "You did it," he said softly. Mira smiled, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "We did it." He looked around, pride evident but quiet. "You turned an idea into something real. That is what leadership should look like." She turned to him, her voice light but honest. "And you learned that love does not belong in a contract." Adrian laughed quietly. "It is strange, is it not? 90 days to learn what I should have known all my life." He reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope, cream-colored, sealed with gold. "A new contract?" she teased. "Something like that," he said, handing it to her. Inside was a single page with one line typed in bold letters. "Only one clause, love, without expiration." Mira felt tears sting her eyes as she looked up at him. "This is not legally binding, Mr. Wolfe." "That is the point, Miss Tran," he said with a smile. "The best promises are not made on paper." Around them, cameras flashed, but this time not for gossip reporters had gathered to cover the launch of the center, not the love story that built it. Adrian took her hand, guiding her toward the stage where the ribbon waited to be cut. "Are you ready?" he asked. "More than ever," she said. Together, they cut the ribbon as applause filled the air. Later, when the crowd dispersed, they stood alone in the courtyard. Adrian held out something small and familiar, the silver pen she had once signed the contract with. "You left this behind," he said. Mira took it, her thumb brushing over the engraved initials. "Funny," she said, "it started everything." He shook his head gently. "No, Mira, you did." As the sun dipped low, painting the sky in gold and rose, he wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "What now?" she asked. "Now," he said, looking out at the building filled with laughter and life. "We keep building together." She leaned into him, the sound of the city blending with the hum of creation behind them. The countdown was gone, replaced by something far better: an open future, written not in ink or rules, but in trust.